The drop pod slammed into the jungle with a force that sent shockwaves through the ground, splitting ancient roots and sending flocks of unseen creatures shrieking into the dense canopy above. Steam hissed from the metal shell as the hatch blew open, releasing a single occupant into the hostile world. Sergeant Dorian Graves staggered forward, boots sinking into damp, moss-covered soil. His body ached from the rough atmospheric entry, but pain was nothing new. He inhaled deeply, the air thick with humidity and the rich scent of vegetation. His keen eyes scanned the surroundings, towering alien trees with bioluminescent veins, thick vines draped like nooses, shadows shifting unnaturally between the dense foliage. He was being watched. The Zelvok called this their hunting ground, a planet teeming with predators that made Earth's deadliest wildlife look like pets. But Dorian wasn't just another prey. He was a soldier, trained for survival in the worst conditions imaginable. He crouched, fingers brushing against the soil. It was damp but firm, ideal for holding footprints. That meant tracking would be easy, for both sides. His heart pounded with controlled adrenaline. He had no weapons, no supplies, just the combat fatigues on his back and the knife strapped to his calf. It would have to be enough. A distant clicking sound echoed through the jungle. A language, almost insectoid in tone, signaling between unseen hunters. The Zelvok had already begun. Dorian moved swiftly but silently, stepping over roots, slipping through thick underbrush without disturbing so much as a leaf. He had spent years honing the art of moving unseen, becoming a phantom in war zones. Now, those skills would decide whether he lived through the night. The first sign of danger came as a whisper through the trees, a change in the wind, a scent of something metallic and burning. He didn't hesitate. He dropped flat against the ground just as a blast of plasma sizzled through the air above him, carving a smoking hole into the tree beside him. They were close. He rolled, pressing himself into a trench of tangled roots. His mind worked fast, cataloging what he knew. The Zelvok were apex hunters, their senses sharper than any humans. They saw in spectrums beyond visible light, their weapons designed for precision kills. But they had a flaw: overconfidence. They believed in strength, in the thrill of hunting weaker beings. Dorian smirked. Let them think he was weak. A rustling to his left. The hunter was closing in, its footsteps careful, calculating. He could hear the faint whir of its targeting system adjusting for another shot. Dorian counted the seconds. 1. He shifted his weight, tensing every muscle. 2. The hunter stepped into the clearing, its towering armored frame silhouetted against the glowing jungle. It raised its weapon. 3. Dorian moved like a coiled spring. He lunged, seizing the Zelvok's weapon with one hand while driving his knife into the creature's exposed throat with the other. Black blood spurted onto his arm as the alien gurgled, its mandibles snapping in shock. He twisted the blade, severing something vital. The hunter dropped without a sound. Dorian exhaled sharply, wiping the knife on the dead alien's armor. His heartbeat was steady. He pried the plasma rifle from the corpse's grip, inspecting its alien design. Heavy, but manageable. Enough charge for several shots. A guttural roar split the jungle, deep, vibrating through the air. The other hunters had found their fallen comrade. Dorian stepped back into the shadows, rifle in hand, a slow smile creeping across his face. Let the hunt begin. Dorian moved like a shadow through the jungle, his every step calculated, his breath controlled. The Zelvok had tightened their formation, their discipline evident in the way they moved, no longer toying with their prey but hunting a threat. He had forced their hand. The corpse of their fallen brother lay behind them, its blood soaked into the mossy ground, a silent warning that this was no ordinary hunt. The plasma rifle in his grip was heavier than anything he had trained with, its alien design unfamiliar but intuitive. He had already dismantled one of its energy cells, noting the charge depletion rate, the heat buildup. The Zelvok crafted their weapons for swift, brutal efficiency, but they never considered how an enemy might turn them against their own. That was their weakness. A clicking sound resonated through the canopy. Commands. Repositioning. Dorian crouched behind a fallen tree, eyes tracing their movements. 3 hunters fanned out in the undergrowth, moving with fluid precision. They wore chitinous armor that reflected the bioluminescent glow of the jungle, their elongated limbs allowing them to traverse the terrain with unnatural ease. Their weapons hummed with deadly energy. He had seconds to act. He adjusted the rifle's grip, aligning its crude sight with the head of the nearest hunter. A controlled breath. A squeeze of the trigger. The plasma bolt seared through the humid air and struck true, blasting a hole clean through the Zelvok's skull. The creature dropped instantly, its weapon clattering against twisted roots. The other two reacted with inhuman speed, diving for cover, their rifles firing wildly into the trees. Dorian was already moving. He rolled behind a thick tangle of vines as plasma rounds scorched the air where he had been standing a heartbeat before. The smell of burnt foliage filled his lungs. He slung the rifle over his shoulder and drew his knife. The next kill would be silent. One of the hunters was repositioning, its attention locked on the spot where Dorian had fired from. It spoke in a series of guttural clicks, signaling its companion. The second hunter remained crouched, scanning the trees, anticipating another ranged attack. But Dorian wasn't where they expected him to be. He crept low, feeling the damp earth beneath his fingers as he closed the distance. Every muscle in his body was coiled, every nerve focused. The first hunter was barely 2 meters away when Dorian struck. He lunged, wrapping one arm around the Zelvok's throat while driving his knife into the soft joint beneath its armored ribs. The creature spasmed, claws scraping against his forearm, but Dorian twisted the blade deep, severing something vital. The hunter's strength gave out, and he eased it silently to the ground. The last hunter was still scanning the canopy, oblivious. Dorian retrieved the fallen alien's plasma pistol and leveled it at his final target. A single shot. The bolt struck the Zelvok's spine, severing it instantly. The hunter collapsed forward, twitching, its body shuddering in death throes. Silence settled over the jungle once more. Dorian exhaled, wiping the sweat from his brow. 3 more down. But he knew there were more. A distant, thunderous growl rumbled through the trees, something deep, primal, not of the Zelvok. The jungle itself was stirring. He had made enough noise. Now, he wasn't just fighting the hunters. He was fighting the jungle, too. The jungle was alive with movement. Dorian could feel it in the way the air shifted, in the way distant creatures fell silent as if sensing the storm about to break. The Zelvok had regrouped. They had learned. The hunt was no longer a game for them, it was a war. And they were coming in force. He crouched atop the thick roots of a towering tree, watching through the dense foliage. The jungle stretched before him, dark and endless, but he wasn't looking at the terrain. He was watching them. A squad of 6 moved in formation, their rifles sweeping the undergrowth, their bodies tense. Their armor, once sleek and polished, was now marred with mud and scratches. Dorian had bled them dry of their arrogance. He had made them cautious. He had made them afraid. Good. He adjusted his grip on the plasma rifle, its energy cell running low. This wasn't going to be a battle of firepower. It was going to be a battle of control, of terrain, of tactics. Dorian had spent years learning how to make a battlefield his own. And now, this jungle was his. The Zelvok advanced, their sharp, insectoid eyes scanning for movement. He let them come. 30 meters. The leader raised a hand, clicking out orders. They were hesitating. 20 meters. One of them turned, sniffing the air. Dorian knew what they smelled: blood, sweat, something foreign in their domain. 10 meters. Too late. Dorian triggered the trap. The jungle erupted. A section of thick vines snapped free, releasing a log spiked with jagged shards of alien bone. It swung with deadly force, colliding with the first hunter and crushing its torso in a sickening crunch. The others recoiled, chittering in alarm, weapons raised. Dorian struck before they could regroup. He dropped from the tree like a phantom, landing between 2 of them. His knife flashed, slicing through the throat of one, his elbow cracking against the skull of another. The third raised its rifle, but he was already moving, spinning low, kicking its legs from beneath it. The Zelvok fought viciously, but they were used to prey that ran. Dorian didn't run. He tore through them like a force of nature. One lunged, claws swiping for his throat. He ducked, driving his blade into the exposed joint beneath its arm. It howled, staggering back, but he was relentless. He ripped the plasma pistol from its belt and fired point-blank into its skull. The remaining hunters reeled, their formation shattered. They had come hunting a man. They had found a monster. Dorian stood amidst the carnage, breath steady, body coiled for the next wave. Blood dripped from his blade, pooling into the jungle floor. And then he heard it. Not the Zelvok. Something deeper, older, watching from the darkness beyond. The jungle had one last hunter to throw at him, and it was coming. Dorian stood in the aftermath of the slaughter, his breath steady despite the carnage around him. The jungle, once filled with the rhythmic chittering of unseen creatures, had gone eerily silent. Blood seeped into the earth, dark and viscous beneath the dim glow of bioluminescent plants. The Zelvok squad lay in ruin, their bodies twisted, their weapons useless in their lifeless grips. And yet, the hunt was not over. A presence loomed beyond the trees. Something bigger. Something worse. He had felt it watching him, waiting, assessing. The Zelvok were hunters, but this was different. This was a predator. The leaves shuddered as something massive pushed through the foliage. A low, guttural snarl reverberated through the jungle, sending vibrations up Dorian's spine. He tightened his grip on the plasma rifle, its energy cell flashing a warning, almost depleted. His knife was still slick with alien blood, but he doubted it would be enough. Then he saw it. Towering over the battlefield, the beast emerged. Its reptilian frame was wrapped in thick, overlapping plates of natural armor, its elongated skull marked with old scars, a testament to battles survived. The Zelvok had sent their best, but this was their apex. Their last answer to the threat he had become. It was here for him. Dorian exhaled, slow and controlled. He had one shot. Maybe two. That was it. The beast charged. He dove sideways as its claws ripped through the space he had occupied a heartbeat before. The force of its lunge sent splinters flying as trees cracked beneath its bulk. Dorian hit the ground rolling, rifle snapping up, fingers squeezing the trigger. The plasma bolt struck its shoulder, searing into flesh, but the beast barely flinched. It turned with terrifying speed, its yellow eyes locking onto him, filled with something close to intelligence. It was studying him, learning. Dorian moved before it could react, sprinting toward a tangle of roots, using the jungle's uneven terrain to his advantage. The beast followed, relentless. It was faster than anything that big had a right to be. He slid beneath a low-hanging branch just as the creature swiped, its claws raking deep gouges into the bark. He fired again, aiming for the eyes, but it twisted its head at the last second, the shot burning harmlessly across its plated forehead. Dorian cursed. The rifle was empty. No more running. He drew his knife and pivoted, letting the beast's momentum carry it past him. He leaped onto its back, muscles screaming in protest as he drove the blade between its armored plates, sinking it to the hilt. The beast roared, a sound that sent birds scattering into the sky. It bucked wildly, slamming him against a tree, but he held on, twisting the knife deeper. He could feel the heat of its blood spilling over his hands, thick and steaming. It wasn't enough. With a final, violent heave, the beast threw him off. He hit the ground hard, the impact rattling his ribs. The creature staggered, wounded but far from finished. It turned toward him again, nostrils flaring. Dorian forced himself to his feet, chest rising and falling with exhaustion. He had nothing left. No bullets. No tricks. Just a knife buried in the thing's hide. Then he saw it. The plasma rifle one of the fallen Zelvok had dropped, half buried in the dirt. The beast lunged. Dorian dove, fingers closing around the rifle as the monster's claws slashed through his shoulder. Pain flared, white-hot, but he gritted his teeth, rolling onto his back. The creature loomed over him, jaws parting for the killing blow. He jammed the rifle into its open maw and pulled the trigger. The plasma bolt fired straight through its skull, exploding out the back of its head in a shower of molten bone and blood. The beast froze, its body shuddering, then collapsed beside him, the ground trembling with the impact. Silence. Dorian lay there for a moment, staring at the jungle canopy above, his body numb with exhaustion. Slowly, he forced himself up, blood dripping from his wounds. The Zelvok were dead. Their beast was dead. The hunt was over. He was the last one standing.